Goodness, what a challenge to stand in between yourselves and the drinks, and also to try and follow three fantastic presentations. If ever there was a example of what the title of our strategy means, I think we've just seen it. I've been asked by the board, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to give you just a quick update, I hope, on the work we've been doing with regards to the Conul strategy. And I know you've all been waiting for this session all day. I know I have. I'm going to be peppering it with a few lines from my third favourite writer. And if that isn't an open goal for a question from the floor, I don't know what is. Jonathan Swift, the Dean, as I've become used to calling him in Dublin. And I think it's just to give us a sense of the sheer amount of work that's been going on in between our conferences. How we got here is really quite important, perhaps more so to myself than anyone else, but this has been a very long process, and it continues. We'll be running right through to the end of the strategy in 2019. But you can see there's been a lot of activity, a huge amount of consultation as well, with a very large number of people across Ireland and internationally indeed, to bring us to the point that we're at this, our third conference. So obviously there's been a huge amount of activity in the existing groups. It's probably worth mentioning that the conference itself is part of the strategic development of Conul, if you like, in the modern era for Conul. We've not had a conference in this form before, and hopefully you'll all agree that they're hugely successful events. This is only the third conference that we've had in this form, and I think one of the things that, just observationally, next week I'll be in the CONUL conference in Newcastle University, and I think one of the interesting things just to bear in mind about our conference is that we draw from all of our staff at every level in our libraries, where normally library conferences, I have to say, tend to be at director level or associate director level on the international platform, and it's really wonderful to be together in the sense that we provide that with Conul. We've been working on our new website. We have our email list, which currently has 178 members. We've done some national and international mapping of partnerships, and that'll be influential as we take some other work forward that I'll talk about later. Unfortunately, Owen McCartney, now from the National Library of Ireland, although he has been doing quite a lot of this work from UCD in his previous role before, is unable to be here at this conference, but he's been leading some work on the Union catalogue that we're developing for the island of Ireland. We're looking at the concepts around, and I know some of you have been involved in this before, but around shared storage for us, and perhaps most grippingly, our work around the governance and the constitution of Conul. We're actually quite big, and I'll show that a little bit later. But the main thing I wanted to say today really is around the largest area of work that we've been doing this year since Conference 16, which is around the new and expanded groups. Now, our strategy, and I know everyone's already memorised it, but our strategy set out to answer some really quite what look like simple questions, but are actually really complicated when you start to answer them consortially, about what Conul is, why it's distinctive, what we can do as a unique group of libraries, who our users are, and indeed what our vision is. I think we've heard in the last three sessions from Helen, Catherine and Dawn, certainly examples in terms of services and collections, what our libraries are actually for. So a lot of those things coming through the strategy have developed into a broad body of conversation that we've had over the last year, and created these 8 new groups. We're really grateful to everyone who's been involved in this. I think at the last count that I did, there are 102 people involved in these groups now. So this is a major new if you like, area of activity on this scale for Conul. There's obviously been hugely successful and very valuable work done for many years in some of these areas. We do have some new areas here that you can see, unique and distinct collections. For instance, our collections group, which is a huge body of work that includes the shared storage and the union catalogue and so on. And another new group, which actually was born from a question from the floor at last year's conference, I think from Peter Dudley at Trinity, asking around the customer services side of the house, which is interesting because Lorcan said early this morning it's not just around our collections that define the importance of the libraries, but also the added services. And all of you who work at the front-facing services, of course, now have a group to look at and explore those areas. There's a great variety, as is always the case with Conul, of institutions, and these people are the chairs of those groups. So do go and I haven't warned them about this, but do go up and speak to them if you can get a chance over the conference. And let them know if you have any ideas in these areas. In terms of further delivering the vision of our current strategy, we're going to be starting 2 new groups for this, which is the new strategy implementation group, which will be chaired by a Conul director, and that group will be the 8 chairs of the specialist groups. There'll also be an oversight group, which we're seeing as a body of expertise from the board, with Hugh Murphy as well from MU. We're very grateful for that, just to look at how the groups are working in relation to the new strategy. There's some further next steps. This summer, Owen and myself are preparing a draft tender document for the union catalogue. And please do email myself or Owen at the NLI if you have any further questions around that. The website developments are ongoing. Martin O'Connor from UCC and I met yesterday. It was great to have a meeting with him. He's chair of the Communications and Outreach Group, and there's particularly a new energy, I think, around some of our social media activity. We're also looking at, particularly at board level at the moment, at some pretty high-level sectoral and government engagement. We've got some interesting figures coming to board meetings in the next few months. And of course, there's a huge amount also planned in the groups. We've got a couple of sessions coming up this summer. The strategy implementation group will be meeting in the summer at Queen's. We're really grateful to Queen's for hosting that. It's great to be back at Queen's, in my case anyway. The Communications and Outreach Group will be meeting in DCU, also over the summer period. For the first time, all of the groups will also have a communicator, or indeed already do have, a communications officer. So we're really taking on board some of the helpful comments and suggestions that were made in the last 2 conferences about how our organisation communicates amongst itself, but also how we present ourselves externally. And then the next board meeting will be in September at UCC. Designing a vision or a strategy for so many different libraries and so many different organisations, never mind the multiplicity of users that we all support, has been a huge challenge for us, as it would be for any consortia. I think we're certainly getting there. I think the strategy, as far as we're able to determine, does show a sense of scale in what we maintain and how we provide access to it. There's obviously an enormous amount of potential, I think, at the heart of all of this, and we're so pleased to see such a full room at this conference. I think it's 204, is it? I'm looking at our 2 co-chairs. 211. Okay, so it's up on last year by some way, which is absolutely fantastic. We are looking to provide leadership and obviously collaboration as well. We're very proud of the quality of our services. We're very keen to interpret and explain the depth of our collections. And hopefully what the strategy shows, amongst many other things, is the ambition that there is in this room and in our wider profession amongst our colleagues, not least of whom will be watching online. Some of you will have seen a version of this morning in another presentation, but it might just be worth looking at. We haven't made a huge deal about this, apart from a couple of facts in the strategy. But the Conul libraries, as they stand, amount to these statistics. And as Lorcan was saying, of course, libraries are much more than just statistical amounts and so on. But of course, this is also really important. I think one of the interesting ones at the bottom there is the number of visits, which is an estimate, I have to say, because I wasn't able to get those stats from absolutely everybody. But that's certainly, broadly speaking, where we are. The study spaces is an interesting one. That's almost exactly the same. I'm sure someone's going to start Googling this as soon as I say it. But almost exactly the same as, I think, what did I say? It's 189. How many planes is this? Whatever it says in the strat, I can't read it in this light. But it's based on the number of seats on Ryanair jet planes. So it's an example of how many study spaces we have at the moment. We're attempting a lot as a consortium. All of our libraries individually have their own strategies and obviously key responsibilities at the institutional level. But when we come together, we are also trying to do something bigger than that. And I think the collections, I would have to say, and the collections are very much part of our vision, as well as the services. We do have a very, very wide user base or reader base in our libraries, because we have lots of different types of libraries. I hope that, not least in this conference, there's a sense that people can get that there's a very strong support amongst the Conul community for new opportunities for staff. We are looking to be smart in the way we work together, and I'll talk about that at the very, very end. We are intending to transform the way the organisation operates and its profile. And perhaps most importantly, we're questioning at the very least and thinking about ways to expand what it means to be open. And just as a way of sort of closing, in a sense, what we've been thinking about, we had a session this morning on collaboration and particularly on the research side. And just thinking around that, I was presenting about how far we should go in terms of partnership. And I thought that some of these topics may be helpful for our boat, just in case the conversation dries up. There's interesting ways of looking at the way our libraries operate, and all of our libraries operate in all three of these ways to a degree. For Conul, as it currently stands, it's probably worth noting we're pretty much in the middle. We're a consortia. We have some block negotiations, we have some shared services, and we do monitor access. And I guess one of the questions we were looking at this morning is, what's the logical conclusion to our strategy? Where are things such as the union catalogue logically taking us? And I mentioned earlier that when we launched this strategy at the RIA in December, the publicity company that talked to us about how to present what is Conul to people who've never heard of it, or indeed have hardly really heard of libraries, they got very excited about the idea of a union catalogue, and they said, does this mean that everybody can see what's in your libraries? And of course we said, more or less, yes, broadly speaking. And then they said immediately afterwards, well, does that mean that everybody can get access to it? And it was a very pointed, we did come up with an answer, by the way, but it's that we're working towards it. It was a very good question coming, if you like, innocently from outside of our community. And I suppose, in a sense, the difference in a consortium and a network in this idea is that we're sharing even more, for instance, in the way that Lorcan was talking about this morning, shared collection management, collection development, that we're genuinely open, that we share a strategy and a direction of travel, and that perhaps competition might not be between ourselves on this island, but is actually international. I put a little questionnaire into our session this morning, and this is a sample indication. Now, my colleague Miriam knows that I'm very accurate with my statistics. this is broadly drawn from 21% of this conference who were at the session this morning. There are a number of questions which I'm happy to go into over this evening or tomorrow if you want to come up and ask me. But in terms of the responses for these questions, it was basically a yes or no to all of these. And it was interesting how closely it wasn't planned at all, but how closely they linked in with some of the things that Lorcan was saying this morning around access and shared projects like storage and the LMS, and indeed deduplication, such as happened in other countries. And the idea that does print scale in libraries still matter? You can see there's very consistent responses saying yes. These are all yeses, by the way, not no's. But also for the potential of this strategy and the potential of CONUL as it develops to build more network projects and network technologies into what we do, as opposed to just consortial ones. So it's a thanks really to the CONUL Board of Directors. I think we're a pretty challenging group. And there's a lot of colleagues in the room now, and being able to bounce all of these ideas around that particular room is hugely valuable, and they're immensely supportive of what the organisation is trying to do. It's a thank you formally to the previous strategy implementation group. You know who you are. You've brought us up to this point, and it's been hugely valuable. Looking backward and looking forward, it's a thank you from me personally, and also I think on behalf of the board, for the chairs and members of the CONUL groups and all the work that you do as well. More broadly to the Irish library community, a bit of a call out there to people online, and also to all of these organisations, many of whom's executives were really quite helpful in terms of designing our strategy, and also, of course, to yourselves as delegates at this conference. I'm going to leave you with a note from the Dean. We do have an awful lot in this room. We represent massive resources. I know the general thing you'll hear from directors is that we need more resources to allocate, and that's obviously true, but we do have very compelling and rich resources when we combine in a consortia like this. And I think it's probably just particularly bearing in mind some of the presentations we've seen the rest of this afternoon to think about how we can best use CONUL to expand access to those resources and have an even greater vision for our consortia. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Chris. It was great to have a perspective on where we are. We do have time for one or two very quick questions, if anybody has a question for Chris. Yeah, down the back there.
For those of you who haven't been up here yet, there's a light right there, by the way, which removes half of this room. So if you could be really clear about where you are.
It's Lorcan.
Oh, Lorcan, great.
Yeah, who's your fourth favourite author?
Clever. The fourth favourite author, I would say, is George Orwell.
Wasn't a real question.
Any other questions? Okay. On that note, I think I'd thank everyone for today for your participation, and enjoy this evening. Thank you, Chris.